The A-League is by far the biggest, richest, most important association football league on the continent. It features an eclectic bunch of stadiums, one of the world's longest road trips, and sunshine, because it's played over the summer. So here are the A-League 2021-22 stadiums. AAMI Park, Melbourne City, Melbourne Victory, and the nomadic Western United will play a few games here as well. This award-winning stadium, located in what is one of the world's greatest sports precincts, was actually the first notable rectangular stadium in the city's history, Melbourne being an Australian rules football loving city. The unique geometric cloud-like exterior is complemented by an absolutely stunning interior. I like how the top of the stands actually followed that cloud-shaped outline. What a way to start the video. CommBank Stadium, Western Sydney Wanderers. It's the newest of the A-League stadiums, having been built on the site of the old Parramatta Stadium just a few years ago. The design is very European. It has a double tier of seating on all but one side where the luxury suites and whatnot are, and even a terrace or safe standing room, which is very rare in Australia. It does, however, convert back into seating when the rugby league season comes around. It's a lot more toned down than AAMI Park, but it still looks great. I like how steep that upper deck is as well. Campbelltown Stadium, Macarthur FC. Unlike Melbourne's new expansion team, Macarthur aren't planning on building their own new stadium, but instead upgrading a pre-existing one, which makes perfect sense given how many suburban stadiums there are in Sydney. But for now, it's your typical suburban stadium design that includes a couple of grassy hills to sit on, small stands with plenty of trees in the backdrop, and probably the smell of snags cooking on the barbie, which makes for a relaxed atmosphere. But not as much as Central Coast Stadium, home of the Central Coast Mariners. It's arguably the most picturesque stadium in Australia, mostly due to the fact that it sits on the shore of the rather confusingly named Brisbane Water, an estuary. It's not an unobstructed view that the spectators have of the water and the sailboats. There are palm trees in the way, and on match days, speaking of barbecues, some giant sauce bottles, which add a bit of flavour. Other than the view, it's a decent stadium in its own right. Cooper Stadium, Adelaide United. Adelaide is not just the city of churches, but it was also voted the sporting capital of South Australia. Mount Gambier was snubbed again. If you're a bit obsessive compulsive, you might be slightly annoyed that the main grandstand is slightly off centre. Well, that's because of the road that it backs onto. You also might be slightly annoyed that I didn't finish this set. I could mention the lack of a roof over most of the seats, but Adelaide stays pretty dry over the course of the A-League season, so that's all good. HBF Park, Perth Glory. It's kinda similar to the last one with its lopsided design, but here it allows for spectators in the larger stand to get an excellent view of Perth's skyline. It's one of the world's most isolated cities, by the way, which in recent times has come in handy. The adjacent stand has been there a lot longer. It's from the days when it was an oval stadium. Over at the northern end you have a stand known as the Shed, which is one of the few standing room only stands in Australia. It's got a lot going for it, this place, plenty of character. Marvel Stadium, Melbourne Victory. It was the first retractable roof stadium in Australia, and it's still the only one. The roof certainly gets plenty of use in Melbourne, which is known for having 5 seasons in one day. The 5th one being Splorgen, which is simultaneous sunshine and hail. It was designed to host basically every sport there is, but despite the oval shape, it's still suitable for victory matches due to the movable seating. It's a fine stadium, one that I'm sure Superman will be glad to put his name to.
Superman's not Marvel.
Oh, Batman then.
They're both in the DC universe.
Okay, Shrek? You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I wasn't. I love Shrek.
McDonald Jones Stadium, Newcastle Jets. This one shares a similar story with a few others in this league, in that it was converted from an oval to a rectangular stadium. That was done in the 1980s. The design's also a bit of an amalgam of others we've seen so far, just a little bit bigger and with an interesting pattern on the seats. What are they? Dinosaur eggs? It's quite a simple design, but I like it. And I don't blame the architects for playing it safe. This is perhaps Newcastle's most iconic building, and it looks like a giant Coffs Harbour International Stadium, the secondary home of the Newcastle Jets. It's a quaint little multi-purpose stadium in the scenic surrounds of Coffs Harbour. It simply consists of one grandstand that was recently renovated, and the rest of the capacity is made up of grass berms. Oh, and I should mention that this is the place where the Socceroos kind of bullied American Samoa, 31-0. Moreton Daily Stadium, Brisbane Roar, who recently left their longtime home of Suncorp Stadium. It is a major downsize, but Suncorp's seating capacity was surplus to their requirements, and I'd much rather see a small stadium packed to the rafters. Although the stadium is quite rudimentary, it's looking pretty sharp after a major expansion and renovation. This wasn't specifically for the Brisbane Roar, but the permanent tenants, the Redcliffe Dolphins, have aspirations of becoming an NRL expansion team. But two birds, one stone. And now we head across the ditch to Sky Stadium, Wellington Phoenix. It's a pretty nice location by the port, and I like that sleek metallic exterior, for which it gets the nickname the Cake Tin. I guess you could say the yellow seats are like the butter that you grease the tin with, and that the grass is the mould at the bottom of the tin because you put it back in the cupboard without noticing the thin layer of cake that was stuck to it. There isn't another stadium in New Zealand that's quite like this. It's a multi-purpose oval design that you're more likely to see in Australia. But Wellington is the windiest city on earth, so having a more enclosed stadium is ideal. The Knicks also play the occasional match at Eden Park, New Zealand's biggest and most iconic stadium. It's more well known for rugby, and cricket of course, but Auckland doesn't have their own A-League team, and so for an out-of-town team they do attract a sizable crowd. It's an interesting design. I love the contrast between the exteriors of each side. A very modern translucent facade to the south, and a more traditional opaque facade to the north. Jubilee Oval. Sydney FC have a new stadium being built as we speak, so they'll temporarily be playing at two smaller stadiums. Although it's an oval, the field's not quite as large as some others in this league, so the views aren't bad. You may have already guessed, but I'm a fan of grass berms in the stadium, and this place has a rather impressive one above the seating that wraps its way around the eastern side of the ground. I'm actually quite fond of this stadium. They'll also be playing at Leichhardt Oval. Despite the name, this one isn't an oval. You can probably guess what went on there. The ground's facilities aren't exactly state of the art, far from it, but it's a charming little stadium. I like how it's partially surrounded by a row of fig trees, and it's actually right by the water, although you can't actually see it. And on top of that, a bit of a grassy hill to sit on. I'm like a broken record. Oh, and I'm not 100% sure they're fig trees, it's just something that I feel like I've heard before. Now to all the other stadiums Western United will call home. GMHBA Stadium. It's actually the biggest stadium outside of Australia's capital cities, and after multiple renovations in recent years, it's looking pretty flashy. I especially like those floodlight towers. Geelong is a regional city, but it really isn't too far away from Western United's heartland. Mars Stadium. It underwent a major renovation 5 or so years ago that transformed it from a bog-standard country footy ground to a decent little part-time AFL stadium. Needless to say, it was not built for the A-League, but at least it allows for a small regional city like Ballarat to host a game or two. Come to think of it, it looks like a mini version of the last one. UTAS Stadium. It's yet another regional stadium, but Launceston is nowhere near Western United's heartland. In fact, it's not even on the mainland, but the beautiful island of Tasmania, which doesn't have a professional football team of any sort. But at least they get a taste of it, and UTAS Stadium is pretty good considering Launceston's small population. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.